Hello and welcome to what I think is going to be a really interesting discussion today about brand activism. We're going to be taking a bit of a deep dive into the subject. We'll look at what brand activism actually is, why it can be such an effective tool for brands, and importantly, how it can help create cut-through and really build trust and relationships for brands with customers and stakeholders. I'm Veirty Barr. I'm the Head of Corporate Communications at Cavendish, and I am very pleased to be joined today by Andy Wheatley, an independent brand strategist who has helped to shape and build some of the UK's biggest and best-known brands. Sam Clough, an Executive Director at Cavendish and our Marketing Practice Lead, and our Creative Director, Charli Edwards. So, to kick off today's discussion, I'm going to turn to you, Andy, if I can, and ask you to set the scene for us by giving us a bit of an explanation about what brand activism actually is, and some of the different forms that it can take.
So the best thing to do is start with a definition, because the thing with brand activism is everyone, if you say the word activist, people tend to have a vision of a Che Guevara type figure with a placard shouting for human rights and things like that. And there is an element of that to it, but it's far more nuanced. So I like to see brand activism as three different types. So you have type one, which I would call cause-related marketing. So that's where you get a brand that decides that they will leverage their own particular product with a cause that they're trying to associate their brand with. So a good example of that would be Dove's Real Beauty campaign, which has been going since 2004. Which is celebrating about being confident, and your own beauty is everyone's beauty, and be confident within. Now, and people ask, why do people do this? Well, if you look at their results, I think they went from 2.5 billion to 4 billion in sales over a 10-year period. So it also has a commercial reality to it. The second one, which is the most common one, which is CSR, so corporate social responsibility, which typically, because there are so many examples, I haven't got one in my head right now, but they're all over the place. We all know those types. And that's where a company promotes ethical, sustainable, responsible behavior in general, and it's all over the place. We all see those. And then the third example is probably the most dramatic, which is classic brand activism, which is where a brand takes on its values and it takes on a conscience because of something it believes in wholeheartedly, but usually, and this is the kicker, it's a societal issue. So it could be existential, it could be climate change, it could be pollution, but it could also be diversity. And a good example of this one would be what Nike did with Colin Kaepernick in 2017, 2018, where he decided to kneel for the national anthem in the States. Now, a lot of conservatives would have said, I can't believe he's doing this, he's disrespecting the national anthem. But Nike would say, well, we're celebrating a whole different thing here. And from their perspective, they would have seen, I'm sure, they had a 10% lift in sales that year, and they had a 5% lift in stock market value, which is actually the equivalent of $6 billion US. So there is, there is good reasons to do this. And I'll just say one last thing on this, if I may, is that it's full of difficulty. So 54% of people actually expect brands to do this because they should do it because it's responsible. But 53% of people think it's just all marketing guff. So it is a very, very tough line to follow.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's particularly interesting with brands when they use activism to break social norms. So Bodyform is a prime example of that. So Bodyform for years, they make sanitary wear for period products. And so they started back in, I think, 2017 with their Blood Normal campaign, where they switched out blue liquid that they'd always used in their advertising commercials for red liquid, because they wanted to change the social stereotype around the use of the appearance of blood and what it was all about. And they've continued that throughout all of their marketing campaigns. And in 2020, they did one called Womb Stories. The creative execution of that was video content that was quite graphic, showing the womb, and then they basically got people to talk about their real life experiences around infertility and menstruation and any women's problems. So trying to break the stereotypical silence that we normally see around those typical subjects, but also trying to raise the profile of their product and their brand, but in a really positive way.
So Sam, I think you've given us a really nice example there of where brand activism can be used as a real force for good to change perceptions positively and to open up conversations. But Charli, I think you've got a really nice example of an activism campaign which started from that standpoint but then kind of escalated into something a little bit more controversial.
Yeah, definitely. So the viewers at home and some of you guys in the audience might be familiar with the One Love campaign, which was started by the Dutch Football Association back in 2020, and the whole premise around the campaign was to help to stamp out racism and discriminatory behaviour within football. It was a great campaign. They're still wearing them today, so it's an armband. There's the whole brand behind it now. But the movement and the campaign really gained traction with more and more clubs coming to the movement to show their support for LGBTQ+. But when we fast forward a little bit to 2022 with the World Cup in Qatar, where they have very different laws and societal beliefs, the football players that supported the movement were told that if they wore those armbands, they would actually be penalised. They would be given yellow cards. So all of a sudden, everyone, when it kind of needed it most, when it needed that support, all dropped it because they didn't want that penalty. And kind of there's two sides to it, right? So not only did it damage the campaign because it lost traction, all of a sudden the biggest platform on the world for football, the World Cup, and teams were stepping back from being a part of it. But also the kind of reputational damage to FIFA and those clubs was quite immense because there was backlash of why are you guys supporting it here, but all of a sudden where it matters you're not supporting it and you're stepping back from being a voice for us. So it's a really good example of where those campaigns where they really start with great traction, but the minute there's that challenge where the environment is a little bit more maybe hostile or different views and beliefs, you either have to kind of step up to the mark and take that flak from that side, or unfortunately brands do step back and it kind of makes it a token campaign instead of the movement that it should be.
And I guess anything that is impactful enough to shift perceptions and to be kind of deemed activist or activism is always going to be controversial. And I think particularly in this age of misinformation and disinformation, there is also always going to be a challenge to brands from activists themselves as well. And I'm really interested in how some brands seem to be super resilient to that and can really weather the storm, or as in the example that you've said, that actually it can really kind of cause some challenge and some brands can really struggle to recover from and counter that impact. So Sam, I wonder if you could maybe give us your thoughts on how brands can kind of build up that resilience and build up their brand capital so that if that does happen, they can weather it.
Yeah, I think it comes back to really having sort of strong leadership and cultural base within your organisation, so that you've got a very clear vision on what you stand for, who you are. All of your employees completely understand that, and that you live and breathe that culture, and that you are able to be quite decisive, because things will go wrong, but you need to have a really clear plan to be able to deal with it and overcome when people either criticise or they disagree with your approach. I think another factor is also about having building a really strong reputation and trust with your customer base and stakeholders. As a brand, you really need to invest time in doing that, so that when you are going to encounter criticism, you are able then to you're coming from a place of trust, so people trust that your response and how you respond to it and how you handle it will be dealt with in the right way.
And what I'd add to that is just also with brands, there is a tendency to want to take on a cause because you feel passionately about it. And I just encourage those who are in charge of that to do their due diligence on that cause, because there are a lot of things that once you lose control of the narrative, the emotion takes over. And once the emotion takes over, you lose it. And there are also other pitfalls on here, is that there's the press as well. And everyone, this isn't quite linked to it. You only have to look at what happened to Jaguar when they announced their new rebrand. The press will take it and run with it. And if you haven't done your due diligence and you aren't prepared for that, you will lose control of the narrative. So just make sure you do that due diligence before you take on a cause.
I think another thing is just consistency. So I think that the reason why I think, love or hate Dove, I actually quite admire Dove as a brand, because I think they've been really consistent in their approach and what they stand for in terms of diversity and body normality. And I think that, as a consumer, you can see that they've got a very clear vision and purpose, and they stand by that, and it's consistent. And so even if they were to make a mistake, and they have been criticised for certain campaigns, I think that you will forgive them, because you know that they've made a mistake, but generally that they are very committed to what they say that they're going to do and to their cause.
And do you think part of that is, and maybe this is one for you to pick up on, Andy, do you think part of that is because the activism, or that the focus of their activism resonates really clearly with the audience that they are targeting, sell to?
That's percent, but there's also an element of luck in it as well, and that's, people forget, that's why the more due diligence you do, the luckier you tend to get. But if you look at another cause-related one, when the National Lottery did This Girl Can, 2014, 2015, which was seismic. If you look where women's sport is now, today, I don't think that would have happened without This Girl Can.
Yeah, that was a brilliant campaign, wasn't it? I mean, that's stopped me in my tracks.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think the one thing, if we take a step back with all of these campaigns and the challenges that they face, you've got to remember human nature. So we, as a species, suffer with negativity bias, it's called. So to hit you with a fact, 63% of negative information is retained above positive. So we are tuned, and it's probably dates back to, when we were living in caves and fight or flight and everything else. But we are tuned to take in negative information before we take in positive information. So in the digital age that we live in now, where we are bombarded with algorithms that are all geared towards the biggest reactions across content, we are already kind of in a challenging position with what content we are receiving and we're taking in, because naturally we are tuned to hear the negative before any positive. So brands today, how they react to risk is very different to 10 years ago, 20 years ago, when if something happened, you could repair your reputation within 18 months to 2 years. Now, because of digital and virality of content, you can kill a brand overnight because of that impact of the algorithms and our own kind of psychological need to ingest negativity, unfortunately.
And I guess, Sam, that picks up on that point, and as you said, Andy, that need before you go down the route of developing your kind of activist position for your brand, of making sure that before you get there you have got the brand capital, you've got the resilience, you've got the
it's got
strategies
to
in
be.
place
You've got to have
manage
a
it
really
effectively.
clear and robust strategy that's really well thought through. And you've considered all the risks, all the opportunities, and also it's that consistent strategy, because a lot of brand activism campaigns start off, like year one, that's just about awareness, that they gain momentum over time. And so you've got to be able to weather that storm through all of the media headlines, for all of the the challenges that will come up alongside your campaign delivery. So it's about having a really clear strategic vision, and making sure that everyone that is helping you to deliver that really understands your direction of travel.
One of the things I often see as a creative director is a reluctance to be seen to spending too much money on championing your organisation. So when you're an organisation within a sector that does suffer a lot of challenges or opposing views, there's this natural reluctance not to be seen to be spending money and kind of poking the bear, because that makes things worse. But actually, that's quite detrimental to your brand and your reputation, because you need to be countering the information with those positive stories and those positive initiatives and messages that you can put out there. Not only does it help with building a transparent relationship with your audiences, but it allows you to counter that misinformation and the negative messages out there with your own truth. And to Sam's point, it helps you to gain a little bit more control back from that narrative. But time and time again, brands will shrink back from spending money on promoting themselves from within because they think it will be perceived as wasting money.
But we all know that we appreciate brands and have a deeper connection with brands that have got a voice. So if you think about Tesco, you know, every little helps. We all know that tune, you know, and, you know, like there's lots of brands that we know that talk to their customers regularly about a whole range of topics, and whether that is, you know, saving money or, you know, like affordability or diversity. You know, we appreciate brands that have a voice, but they've got to have a very clear vision for that voice, and also a vision that helps them to connect with their customers and or their audience.
And Tesco's is a great example of reputational bounce back. So I'm sure we all remember it, but the horse meat scandal. So horse meat appearing in burgers. So this was back before, you know, the times of digital media like we have now. But they were able to bounce back from that scandal, from those big newspaper headlines, and build back that reputation that Sam's been talking about. When you think if something like that happens today, how much harder it is to build that reputation back quickly through transparency and trust and open communications with your audiences, because of the virality of what that whole scandal could be. It's much harder to kind of gain control of that. But to your point, Sam, that doesn't even cross your mind when you think of Tesco's right now. They are a trusted, truthful brand. They're trying to, you know, promote being able to be healthy eaters on a budget. But actually, if you go back to those scandals, they are there. So it just proves that brands can bounce back.
And that trust word, I think, is really important and something I'd like to kind of dig into a little bit more, because I think, as you said with Sam, with the example of the Dove campaign, you know, they've built up trust with their customers, and it's very clear to see what Dove stands for and what its values are. And I'm really interested to kind of get your take on the role that brand values play these days. And the way that organisations need to embody those, and whether those values are still important and worthwhile, and effectively, like, is there still any value in values?
It's like a lot of this, it's tricky territory. So I'm going to lay the blame squarely somewhere here. So in the last 10 years, we've seen a rise in brand values. And so you get, this is where I'm going to lay the blame. So you get someone like Simon Sinek, who has, and there's nothing wrong with Simon, but he created this thing called Start With Why, which is actually important. You should have a why. But what happens when you take that to the nth degree and you keep going, what is your why? And then everyone thinks they have to have a why. And then that's where it becomes tedious, it becomes repetitive. And the thing with brand activism is that brand management and brand activism are two very different things. Management is about manage risk, make sure you do things properly. And if in doubt, don't do it, right? And, you know, give an example of one that didn't go well is when Pepsi decided to get on board with the whole Black Lives Matter thing, when they decided to do their little advert with Kendall Jenner, right? And, you know, retrospectively you think, oh, why on earth did you do that? You've effectively taken a big campaign, Black Lives Matter, which has a whole load of emotion, and you've belittled it, right? And I don't think Pepsi were expecting quite that reaction. But from Pepsi's point of view, they probably thought it was their Coke moment, where Coke in the 1970s had "I'd like to buy the world a Coke," you know, but it was a very different world then.
Yeah, I mean, I personally think that brand values are really key for a business. They are the anchor point for everything that a brand should do, and the way it talks to its customers, the way it delivers its service, the way it engages with its employees, and I think they're just the fundamental bedrock of any organisation when lived well. And I think now consumers are really savvy, because if they're not lived, then that's when brands start to come under harsh criticism.
Yeah, I think that's a really well-made point, that brands can really easily get caught out for not embodying their values, can't they? Which I guess comes back to your point, Andy, of that cycle of if you're not going to live up to them,
absolutely,
don't have them.
Yeah, and that's often why we're seeing some movement of some brands moving from brand values to brand manifestos. So brand manifesto was a statement of intent, and this is how we do things, rather than saying, you know, wearing their values on their sleeve, saying we're passionate, we're innovative, we're all this sort of thing, because it gives them a wider framework in which to attack the world's the wrong statement, a wider framework with which to approach the world, and, you know, the brand manifestos are a decent direction of travel.
I think also you're starting to see a lot of when you see some startups, the ones that really pique a consumer's interest quite early are the ones that really place values at the heart of their proposition right from the very start. So there's a toilet roll brand called Who Gives a Crap, and they're all about sustainability and ethicalness, if that's a word, and good ethics. They give 50% of their profits back to looking at tackling sanitisation and deforestation. So, as a brand, you're buying into that whole sustainability vision and the values that sit at the heart of that organisation. And that brand, I think, for me, it's been really clever. It's really simple, the way that they've executed the messaging. I feel like it's become a bit of a status symbol for some people to say, hey, I'm really ethical, and I'm doing my bit because I'm buying this toilet roll. So I think it's a really interesting example of where those values, right from the very start, are a very core part of that brand proposition.
I think there's a key part of that, it's just that remembering that if you run a brand, you effectively are saying something about the people that buy your brand. So, and they want to feel that. So, I mean, on your example there, I remember every house I've been in where in the toilet they've had Who Gives a Crap toilet paper. Yeah. Because the packaging sticks out. Exactly, the packaging sits there. But the person who's bought it knows, and brands do this all the time. Good brands know that when someone purchases their product, they're making a statement about themselves. Yeah.
And Charli, as somebody who originates brands and creates brands, how do you think the power of creativity can be used to communicate some of these ideas that we've been talking about? How can you position a brand as an activist or as having really strong ethics or sustainability through the creative design of a brand?
I think one of the things that we face nowadays in our organisations, so marketing, communications, is that everybody is bombarded with so much content. The first thing that tends to happen is, we need to do something wacky. We need some sort of wild card activation, or we need to do something really kooky to get people's attention. And that does work from time to time, but it's a bit of a Hail Mary. What brands need to do is one, you need to remember that your brand is much more than the way you look, the values. There is a whole model behind a brand and its intensity. So, what you stand for, how you do it, why you do it, your values, your theme, what you live by in terms of your narrative and how you go out to market. But more importantly, it's all of those things coming together cohesively to drive your organisation forward. And the only way you can do that successfully is by understanding how that connects to your audiences. So really understanding how to provide context. So connecting your audiences, your stakeholders, your employees to something that resonates with them as individuals. And if we look at how people consume nowadays, to the Who Gives a Crap point, people want to be seen to be supporting brands that stand for something, and people want to be seen to be working for brands that stand for something. So all of these elements can't carry your brand on their own. They have to work together. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that brands face today, is because when you have to react quickly to what's going on in the world, or you feel like you need to have a voice on a particular subject, but also you then have to manage your reputation, your risk, everything else. So if all of those elements of your brand are working together, it means that the people behind your brand, your workforce, your teams, understand what you're trying to do. Everybody has accountability and they're going in the same direction. And it allows you to be more creative in a way that's going to truly resonate with your audiences.
And Sam, when it comes to communicating this to the external audiences, do you think that there are formats or channels that really lend themselves to this type of kind of creative communication over some others?
I do. I think video is really powerful. I'm a huge fan of video content and use it a lot in our campaigns. But I think it enables you to create a really emotive connection with your audience. It's a really powerful way of telling stories, and not just selling brands and selling product. I think social media, again, is another great channel that, if harnessed well and authentically, can provide a really good way of connecting with your audience. But you've got to do it authentically. Innocent Drinks, for example, you know, they are really fun, playful. They're a really fun, playful brand. And they invested heavily in social media as one of their primary channels to engage with their audience. It was a cost-effective way of reaching their customer base. You know, when they were a startup, they couldn't probably afford to spend on big TV advertising campaigns, and so they brought their personality to their customers and to people through social media, and it was highly effective.
And just picking up on that example of Innocent, and as you said, Sam, you know, they had a very kind of well-defined position and proposition. Andy, again, with your kind of brand strategist hat on, how important do you think it is for a company, for a brand, to have that like really, really distinct definition of who they are and what they want to stand for?
It is a classic case of storytelling as well, because they had this story about how the three guys that founded it were going to fairs and saying, like, try this, you know, and then it all built from there. The issue I have with all of it, though, is that when you become super successful, a brand like Innocent, and you get bought by Coca-Cola. Yeah. All right, and suddenly you've got a whole new challenge going on, and you know, so another brand that was in that, which was defined so well by its values, was the Body Shop, Anita Roddick's Body Shop. Fabulous, right? I mean, absolutely wore its heart on its sleeve, and then I think purchased by L'Oreal.
Yeah, it was.
Right.
Yeah.
So you know, there is a very the thing about this whole area is it is so nuanced. There are so many pitfalls to fall into, and if we just go back to the creativity angle as well, is one of my favourite terms is using this term, putting lipstick on a gorilla, where lots of brands have been guilty of that for a lot of time, where they can make themselves look beautiful, they can make themselves look so well CSR defined, and this, that, and the other, but actually, it's not happening.
Comes back to simplicity and authenticity, doesn't it? Because you know, those brands that are authentic, you know, we know now that with Innocent, for example, when that first came out, it was shiny, it was new, it was fun, it was different, and they had real personality as a brand. And I think as a consumer, I knew when they've been bought by a big conglomerate, because it did change, and they just became another product on the shelf. You know, so I'm a packaging magpie. I love any new brand that comes out into the market, and I love the story that gets put behind them. And I especially pique my interest when there's something like who gives a crap, or there's a product like the Patagonia's brand. You know, when they come out with a really compelling story that feels different to what else is out in the market.
Big organisations can do it though. So Andy's going to counter with an old campaign, but if we talk Apple, they recently came out with a campaign that's video based to promote their hearing aid functionality for their new AirPods, and that video piece is beautiful. It's so simple. It's all storytelling. So it's all about, if you haven't seen it, a father who has hearing difficulties being able to hear his daughter play guitar. And it's the way that the advert shows people in a real life scenario, in real life problems, real life challenges that people have every day. But it's so simply done. There's not loads of hidden meanings and anything like that. It's just showing you.
It's beautiful, that film.
It's lovely.
Yeah.
And it's showing you how that product can enhance your life. It's going to help you be able to do something that matters to you, and that's really important. So big brands can do that. They can connect with their audiences on an authentic level, but they also get it wrong sometimes, don't they?
So Charli, you idea, so I will counter that. So I think here is just understanding that there's no science to this, and some brands get it right, some brands get it wrong. So 2 years ago, Apple did a campaign featuring Mama Nature, and it was beautifully filmed, and it was the Apple board, including Tim Cook, who's in the advert, reporting to Mama Nature, who's sitting as the chairman of the board, and talking about their efforts of sustainability, and it's a beautiful piece. Right, and then you wait for it to settle, and then for 2 days, the whole internet's going, this is amazing, this is brilliant, they're so sustainable. And someone says, they've just launched their new Apple Watch, and they're going to shift 20 million units of that in 2 days, and of another product that no one needs. And then the iPhone 15 is going to come out, which is just marginally different from iPhone 14, and all these things have got batteries in it. So it is a really, really dangerous territory. Now, brands tend to get away with it because they have a PR machine that can let them do it, but you just need to be aware of it. And you know, the reason why it's dangerous is because everyone has an opinion now. We all have these phones. We can all suddenly say, right, I don't like that, and it's going to go viral. You know, when I started doing this in the late 90s, you know, mobile phones just weren't a thing, and my opinion didn't really matter, and it wouldn't get any viral, you know, effect anywhere.
And I think that's what brands fear now, isn't it? Like, you can bounce back. Like, if a campaign doesn't quite hit the mark, or you know, you have backlash, if you've got the right kind of structure and PR machine behind you, you can turn that around. Like, every big organisation has bounced back from big, you know, challenges with their brand. Apple's a great example of that. So what I would like to see more of from organisations when they're thinking about their brand is, don't shy away from trying to be more creative. Like, don't feel like, oh God, this is a bit different for us, or if it goes wrong, it's most likely not going to be the end of the world. And I do caveat that with most likely. I'm not going to put 100% to my name on that one. But there's always a next campaign, because we are bombarded with so much content now. It's old news after a while. So just take a little bit more of a risk. But no, not even take a bit more of a risk. Be bolder.
I think it's be bold,
things,
but be respectful.
Yeah.
You know, if you want to take a cause on as a brand, I think it's about really thinking through why you're doing it, the genuine reasons why you're doing it as a brand, and how much you can commit to it, and not just doing it as a one-off.
I think on that line as well is just understanding that you can't be perfect. So I've worked with quite a few brands who do a lot of sustainability work, but they have to admit at the same time that not everything they do suits that sustainability agenda. So you have a lot of industrial brands who are essential to the infrastructure of the world, they're essential to the commerce, the wheels of commerce continuing, but by nature of what they do, they pollute. But the message needs to be, but we do our best to reduce that pollution, because you can't be perfect. And if people are seeking perfection, brands who put up their hand and say, oh, we're so good at this, or we're so good at that, I think it's so good. Just to go back on that, when I heard a story about with the innocent guys, it was someone had to go at them about, you know, hang on, you just sold out to Coca-Cola. And one of the quotes was, well, what would you do if someone offered you £325 million? Right? And I actually stopped and went, you know what, he's got a fair point.
Fair enough.
Okay, the guy's not
the
an
answer
angel.
to
He's
that.
not an angel. He didn't, you know, so, you know, just remembering that there are so many different elements to this, and there's no right or wrong answer, but there is a path, and it's all about the middle way.
It's about being better. Don't try and be perfect. Perfect's unobtainable, but be better. And every brand on this planet could aspire to that.
And I think that really neatly kind of wraps up the circle of our conversation, where we've seen that you know, activism can be really positive and it can drive real change, but it can also attract controversy, and that a brand has to be kind of prepared for that and has to be resilient and able to ride that wave through, really. So I think just to end, I think it would be really nice to kind of come to each of you in turn and ask you for like that, what would be that one piece of advice that you would give to a brand who is thinking about bringing that activist mindset into its communications activity. So Charli, shall I come to you first?
Go for it. So mine would just be, know your stuff, essentially. Make sure you're going into it 100% confident that you understand what your audiences, your stakeholders want, what it is that your brand organisation is there for and trying to achieve. Just 100% know your stuff before trying anything.
Sam?
I think don't be afraid to be bold. Be bold, but also be respectful. And don't be afraid to try new things.
I'd reiterate what Charli said, but I'd just add something to it, is that obviously I would say this because I'm a brand strategist, but brands are amongst the most influential things on the planet. And actually, that's a good thing and a bad thing. And just understanding that if you're a brand manager, you run a brand, you have a lot of power and influence at your control. And, you know, on a good day, it's a fabulous thing to be able to do. You know, and brands have a responsibility to encourage better behavior. You know, it's a fabulous thing. And brands sometimes get it wrong, but they can also get it very, very right.
So that feels like a really nice place to end this part of our conversation. And now I'm going to turn to the audience that we've got here with us and see if you've got any questions. I think you've got one to kick us off. Thank you.
So far you've spoken a lot about brands' presence on social media and just the way they put themselves out there in front of the audience. Something that we're seeing a lot nowadays is a lot of brand representatives have their own personal presence on social media that is unrelated to the brand. However, what do you think are the benefits and the risks to that for the brand of having these influential people that are supposed to represent their brand having their own personal presence out there?
It's a really interesting question.
Shall I just start
What do you want to kick off?
I've got a prime example where I think that's really positive. So it's the CEO of Timpsons. So the CEO is really passionate about rehabilitation. They've got a program where they offer jobs to people that have been in prison. And he's very vocal on social media, on LinkedIn and on Twitter about the things that are really passionate to him as a CEO and the values that they hold as a business. And I think that he's got a very clear voice and knows how to use social media to spread the good work that they do as an organisation and to change perceptions around things like benefits, employee staff benefits and how people work and whether you should bring ex-offenders into your business and offer them jobs. And I think that can be a really powerful thing. So I think, sometimes it can be done really well.
The reason influencers exist and why it's so successful is because they give us the context we need in our everyday lives. So they are people that we either admire, aspire to be like, whatever that may be, but brands that use influencers are doing it because those people can show their audiences their products, services, whatever that may be in the context of real life. And I do this because we know influencers are sometimes more curated, but it is about that ability to see the products and services through the lens of someone's real life. And like whether it's renovation influencers or single mums, there's so much potential with brands for influencers because of that nature, and it all comes down to providing context.
It's risky, but I think if you're an authentic organisation with a really clear voice, then I think it can be really powerful.
Yeah, I mean, as a strategist, I see it as risk, just because I think, what on earth are they going to say? But I think it's interesting in the historical context. So I'd like to know, you look at Richard Branson and Virgin, right? How would that brand have coped in this world with him as such he was vociferous, he's got a huge personality. However, would it have been successful in the days of social media when we'd have known everything he was up to? So I'm not suggesting anything, by the way, of that, but suddenly you have all this context on you. And I look at trends and I just wonder if we're now at almost the climax, I think, of influencer marketing, and whether or not we'll see a decrease in it over the next few years, because I think some people are starting to get quite cynical about it, because you see again report after report online saying that so-and-so didn't declare their interest with a certain brand. You then start seeing misinformation happening. And I just, it'll be very interesting to see where we are in 4 or 5 years' time.
I think it's around monetisation though,
yes,
isn't it?
Is, yeah.
So I think that it's when you are seeing brands monetise through social media, then we're quite savvy to that now. I think that the rise of the sort of micro-influencer, and that could be any one of us, that have built a community of followers online or that engage and participate in a community and share our views and values and thoughts. And I think that's when it can be really powerful. And I think that we're starting to see a shift more to that. And even brands now are starting to use the micro-influencers.
And to that point, alongside kind of the almost like the traditional influencer that we're talking about, like social media, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube as a platform for brand awareness and brand building through influencers in a slightly different capacity is really gaining traction. So those YouTube series and YouTube shorts that people watch, they're littered with sponsorships or product placements and things like that. But because it's slightly longer form to a TikTok or a reel or whatever, you're less aware of it. So I predict more of that happening through YouTube and those channels that allow you to build, like a podcast does, building that visual series. I see influence moving into that space more and more over the next few years.
In the front row there, have you got a question for us too?
I've got a couple of questions wrapped up into one. But you talked about the importance of brand values and whether in fact they are important, which I think you all agreed they are. But my question is, should a brand's values remain steadfast over time, or is it essential for them to evolve in response to societal, cultural or generational shifts? So for example, Gen X and millennials are very much in favour of sustainability and workplace equality, whereas Gen Alpha are more focused on mental well-being, inclusivity, digital responsibility. If you believe that they should evolve, how can brands do that authentically rather than appearing inconsistent or being opportunistic?
Andy, this feels like one for you to start us off on.
You've got to unwrap that a little bit.
Yeah.
Consistency is probably a brand's biggest weapon. Right, so if you look at the brands that are most successful, they've been more consistent generally than anyone else. And the paradox here is you get marketing directors who come in, and the average marketing director will probably be in the job for 18 months. So they come in and they think, I've got to change things because this is my CV and this is this, that and the other. And they forget that there's an audience on the other side going, hang on, why did you just change my brand, this, that and the other? And I would apply the same thing to values, but I think we went through a phase, probably 10 years ago, that values were on everyone's walls. You go into an office and I look at that and go, oh, really? Do you have to say we're passionate about this, that and the other? So hence what I mentioned earlier about that move towards brand manifestos, where it's more a statement of, look, this is the kind of things that we do. We're normal people. We're seeing less, like, for example, brand mission and brand vision, which are these statements, which are, who talks that way? Right? Who gets up in the morning and goes, my vision and my mission, right? And I think we're starting to see better terminology from brands, what I call vernacular language, where people go, you know what? Okay, I get that. So just to answer that question, I think they are extremely important, but I think they probably need to be less as values.
Woven into a statement of intent, isn't it?
It's attributes for me. Yes. So I'm going to be really nerdy and embarrass myself on this, but when you think of gaming, right, when you're building a character in whatever game that may be, you have your strength, your wisdom, blah, 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 and you build your attributes and you dial it up and down depending on what your kind of core is. If you think of that, I'm tying the two nerdy things together, but if you think of that for a brand, it is about attributes and having the ability to lean into certain things at certain points depending on the economic or social situations that your brand is facing. Being able to take Cavendish, for example, one of our values or attributes is being bold. And when the sectors that we work with, it is about change. It's about transforming the world around us. So we have to be able to lean into that at different times, depending on what we're doing and the kind of the projects and clients we're working with. So for me, it's all about, similarly to how you would treat your tone of voice, it's being able to lean into the right things at the right times, and attributes allow you to do that.
But if you also think of a brand as a person, over time, you go through different phases of your life, and you sort of change and you shift, and you change your perspectives and perception of things, and outlook. And I think that's why you see brands go through refreshes, because what was maybe right when they started and they founded isn't necessarily right for the market, and also for them as an organisation 10, 15 years later. So that's why some brands do refresh, and we've talked about Jaguar, which is one of the most prominent recent ones. They are being really bold in their approach, and I've been really fascinated by the diversity of conversation and how it was like, oh my God, what have they done? And now they've seen the next the iteration of their product launches, people are going, maybe I was wrong, but we'll see in the sales. So I think it's, I think it's a natural, I think they naturally progress. That's the answer to that question.
Yes.
Sorry, going back a bit to social media, what do you think is the biggest change and challenge to brand activism since the rise of social media?
I think part of it is the commoditization of it. So what were things that were quite rare in the past? So brand activism was genuinely quite rare, and we've seen a massive, I mean, I wasn't really aware of it until the early 2000s. There was a book by Naomi Klein that came out that was called No Logo, and actually what she was arguing, she's a fabulous writer, but what she was arguing at the time was that all these brands are actually influencing negatively the world, right? So Coca-Cola were funding schools, but by making sure that there were only Coke machines in the schools in the States. But it's, it becomes so common and things are doing things, it's whether or not you can believe it. It's believability, it's commoditization, is it as serious as it was? I mean, I go back to that This Girl Can, right, which I thought was one of the best campaigns I've seen in 20 years. Would it be as impactful just 10 years later now? Because we all, we get served with content on our phones all the time, and there's always tear-jerking stuff in there, and there's a little soundtrack to it, and you go, oh, this, that, and the other. I don't know the answer in a sense, but I just think it trivializes.
I think to that point, it's the sheer volume of content that we're exposed to. We do run the risk, and it does happen, that we become a little bit numb to it. So what happens is more and more content is created. It's this race to the top to shout the loudest. And I think that we will see activism potentially become more extreme as it becomes harder to resonate across those digital channels. But equally, to put kind of more of a positive spin on it, is we are seeing the rise of physical experiences coming back. So actually talking to people face to face, having activations where people can come and ask you questions. That is a really powerful tool that's been around forever, but kind of took a back seat to the digital progress, and now it's coming back because we're starting to crave it. And I think the two will kind of continue to go up and down on the scales there, because that piece around human connection is going to be more and more needed through a more physical interaction with people and brands.
I wanted to ask, how much do you believe in transparency in the context of sustainability? And how do brands find the balance between like spreading awareness of climate change and their impact and greenwashing? And also, is it necessary for all brands to show some sort of responsibility regarding climate change?
I think you've got to have a very solid strategy for if you're an ethically responsible business, you've got to be very clear on what your starting point is, whether you're there yet, and what your what your journey is. And I think if you're honest with consumers, then that's good, because it'll be really you can be really clear, and consumers then understand that. But I think if you bend the truth, then I think that will turn off your audience. Look at some of the clothes brands. I mean, there's some brands, like there's brands that we know that make clothes in Asia, and they're not necessarily ethically sourced and produced. And some brands have potentially left the UK market, brands like Gap, because of that. Where other brands still exist, but they have had then to go back and tidy up their act. So they get caught out, but it's then how they respond and how they then do something about it.
I think, sorry Andy, I was just going to say, I think for me, transparency and honesty are two very different things. Transparency is being able to provide that information that your sustainability figures, whatever that may be, your ISOs, all of those bits that help to contribute. But the honesty piece is to Sam and to what Andy was saying at the beginning there, is talking about where you fall short. And I think that's the difference with brands, is that transparency is 100% important, but you have to fill it with the honesty and be open to talking about the areas that you are still working on. And it comes back to that point about not being perfect, it's about being better. And if you're able to live by that mantra of, we know that we're doing great work in this side for sustainability, but we still need to work on this output, that transparency and honesty working together.
I think a brand that does it really well is someone like Co-op, because they say that there's a brand that they support cooperatives and fair trade. They're not going to be perfect. They're going to be selling products that not all of their products that they stock on their shelves do that. But as a general underlying principle for that business, it is about supporting fair trade, buying local, ensuring that you've got some local products in alongside the products that may have been had to travel a long way. You know, so it's about getting the right balance that you know you can achieve as a business.
So I paused earlier because I was going to bring up this topic called noble cause corruption, right? Which is, and I first discovered this when I read a few years ago that I think in 2022 more plastic had been produced in 2022 than any year in history. And in 2023 it went up, and in 2024 it'll continue to go up.
Which is amazing.
It is, but the thing is, but most consumers are actually thinking, well, hang on a minute, but we see all these campaigns about sustainability, we see about recycling, surely it's coming down. And noble cause there are various forms of noble cause corruption, but one of them is this belief that we're doing the right thing. So the brands are telling us this, but actually it's not happening. But we are almost gleefully carrying on with the world because we think we're actually contributing to it. Another form of noble cause corruption is when brands actually know they're doing it. So, you know, you can actually go back historically to cigarette brands who classically were brilliant at this, and that in the face of all the evidence in the world that, you know, this stuff was going to kill you or give you cancer, were saying, oh no, it's, you know, this is safe. You know, so, you know, those two forms. But it is, I mean, the point you make is very, very important, but it's one of balance, but it's one of also just making sure we don't fall into the trap of thinking we're all doing it, when in fact there's still a lot more that needs to be done, and climate change is a big thing at the moment on that.
And accountability, I think that's the kind of at the heart of what you've all been saying, isn't it? That brands have to take accountability, or be accountable for their behaviour. Any final questions? Yes, please.
Yeah, so I think you guys have talked a lot in the context of business to consumer, and I had a question as to whether brand activism is still quite effective in a business-to-business context, and whether there are any key differences in the strategies or approaches in that sort of context, because at the end of the day it's still people to people. But yeah, just wanted to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, so I would have said 5-6 years ago, I'd say absolutely. Massive difference, and you know, classic people were, you know, you're split into your B2B marketer or your B2C marketer. There's someone wrote a book a few years ago called "There's No More B2B." It's H to H, human to human. To your point, it's a bit of a naff point, but it's absolutely true. And I think, you know, to answer that question is that there is essentially no difference now, because we actually all, you know, even if you're here somewhere in a business context, you're still thinking emotively. You're still thinking, you know, why I make a decision? So, I think 5 years ago, different conversation. I think now it's okay. Not everyone's a consumer, but everyone has the same emotive reaction to something, and they know what the message is being said to them.
Thanks very much, audience, for your questions. Some really interesting points there that have added to the discussion that we've had this morning. And thanks again to Andy, Sam, and Charli for joining us. And if you'd like to carry on the conversation with us, then do follow us on our Cavendish socials or visit our website cavendishconsulting.com to get in touch. Thank you very much, and goodbye.